What is going on, guys? So today we are back with the new
Mega Board V2.
Anyways, so today we're actually going to be going over Heracross, which is, if you're new to the channel, whew, Heracross just happens to be like one of my top favorite bug type Pokemon. So it's always a pleasure to talk about Heracross, of course. Yet again, he has some kind of mixed results. So let's get started here. Hopefully you guys don't mind seeing my little podium here where I have all my notes and stuff like that. The camera is at like a super wide angle now. So Heracross is a bug and fighting type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 3101. Now with a 0 on attack, 15 defense, and 15 stamina at level 18, you can hit that 1498, which does allow you to be inside of the Great League here. Now according to my spreadsheet and all the numbers that I have ran, Heracross is around 88th in bulk and 64th in stat product, which is okay. It's not horrible, but it's kind of like middle of the road. But, of course, all of that does come from our base stats here with a 234 on attack, 179 defense, and 190 on the stamina there. It's okay, pretty respectable. Now, of course, with these numbers kind of being mediocre, we know that with our moves, we can bring it back here. And this is kind of Heracross's downfall for me. So in the fast move area, we have two fast moves to choose from. I only wrote counter up here because it's honestly the only one that really matters, I think, at this point. We do have Struggle Bug as well, which is 2.67 energy per turn for 3 damage per turn. After stab, it does get bumped up to the 3.6. And that's just, in both areas, subjectively worse than counter. So we're going to go with counter here. 3.5 energy per turn for 4 damage per turn. After stab, it, of course, does get bumped up to the 4.8. Then we move into our charge moves here, which, this is where I really I wish Heracross was just something, he had something a little better. So we do start here with Mega Horn. For 55 energy, we get 90 damage at a 1.64. After stab, it does bump up to the 108, which makes it a 196 on our damage per energy ratio. Then we move to Close Combat here. For 60 energy, we get 100 damage at a 1.67. After stab, it does get bumped up to the 120 for a clean 2.0. And then last but not least, we do have Earthquake. For 65 energy, we get 120 damage at a 1.85. No stab, of course, there, but it's underwhelming. So all three moves are relatively expensive to fire. Our fastest move is Mega Horn, but even Mega Horn is 55 energy to fire. It's gonna end up taking 8 full seconds until you fire, which is, that's pretty rough. That's a lot. That's very slow. He does kind of have some speed issues, which I think you kind of have to play around with if you want to run Heracross. But out of Mega Horn, Close Combat, and Earthquake, we are going to go with Mega Horn and Close Combat today. For what it's worth, I did try to check around on either running Earthquake versus Close Combat. Mega Horn definitely seems to be needed here because with the bug typing in this cup, it is going to be helpful up against the grass types, and it is going to be kind of helpful as neutral damage to a lot of other things. Whereas Close Combat can really be helpful towards the normal types, but we're already kind of covering those with the counter damage. And then we also have Earthquake, which could be helpful towards the electric types, but it just kind of depends on which one you need. Up against the meta, it didn't change the number of matchups that we win. Of course, it did change the battle rating for the matches, but whether you go with Close Combat or Earthquake, you are going to have the same amount of matchups up against the meta. It just kind of depends on which one your team needs more coverage for. If you need more coverage for the normal types, let's say you don't have a normal type coverage Pokemon on your team, maybe you want Heracross to help with a little bit more of that coverage, then definitely go with Close Combat. If you're needing some more coverage towards the electric types, then maybe you want to think about going with Earthquake. It just kind of depends. But for the purposes of this video, we are going to stick with Counter, Mega Horn, and Close Combat as our moveset here. So now let's actually go over some shielding scenarios for our Heracross here. We're going to start with the 0 versus 0, which is where I don't have any shields, my opponent doesn't have any shields, kind of like a closing type situation. We actually have a 59.7% win ratio here, which is pretty decent. That's not too shabby. Moving on, we do have the 2 versus 0, which is an 87.3%. But I'm actually not too worried about that 87%. I really want to know which Pokemon still end up beating us. If I have both shields in this scenario and my opponent doesn't have any, I really want to know which Pokemon still end up beating me. And to no one's surprise here, a lot of the Psychic type fast move users and a lot of the Flying type users end up having a ton of advantage over us here, which I guess they're just preying on weakness, which does make a lot of sense. Then we do have our 0 versus 2 situation, which is where I don't have any shields. My opponent actually has 2 shields. We actually have a 20.1. I think that possibly may be the highest one that we're going to have all cup. Let me, even Vigoroth only had a 9.7. Linoon had a whopping 0. And Pidgeot, at best, with Air Slash, had 14.2. So I may go out on a limb and say that 20.1 could be the highest that we see in that shield scenario all month long. Which, of course, we're actually worried about that 20% here. We actually want to know which Pokemon, even if they have complete shield advantage, that we can still end up beating. And not too surprising, with all of the normal types running around in the cup, we do have a ton of wins up against anything that's basically just going to be weak to that counter damage. So the normal types, any of the rock types are thrown in here that just kind of end up getting obliterated here. Our last shield scenario is a 2 versus 2, which is where I have both shields, my opponent has both shields. We actually end up winning 61.9% here, which is fairly decent. So comparing our opening to our closing shield scenario, it definitely does look like Heracross prefers to open. We're going to talk a little bit about our matchups, and we're going to talk a little bit about the flying types and how they're probably like the hardest thing to go up against. And yeah, that's true, but there's actually not too many of the flying types in the cup, so the ones that are relevant are definitely going to give us a lot of trouble, but outside of that, we pretty much are free to go up against a ton of this meta. 61.9% is a lot of Pokemon that we still end up beating out of this cup. So here in PvPoke, we're actually going to take our Heracross, we're going to build it with counter, close combat, Mega Horn, just like we said. We're going to give ourselves 1 shield, then we're going to switch over and make it a multi-battle up against a custom group. And then down here in this quick fill option, we do have the Jungle Cup meta. And we're just going to choose that. We're going to make sure we give them 1 shield as well for the fairness. And then actually we're just going to hit battle. And as you can see here, we do have 9 wins, 12 losses, and a draw. So let's actually go over these here. So we actually have a win up against Magneton, Credilli, Magnezone, Breloom, Fortress, Alolan Golem, Alolan Graveler, Vigoroth, which is a big one, Lantern, and then we start to tie up against ourselves as Heracross there. Then we move into our losses, which are going to be Scizor, Raichu, Vespiquen, Ivysaur, Pidgeot, Victreebel, Venusaur, Knockdown, Beedrill, Venomoth, Scyther, and Masquerain rounding out the bottom there. Unfortunately, we don't have more than 50% of the meta covered, but generally I wouldn't say that 50% is very common against these meta Pokemon. Something like Vigoroth, of course, is going to be extremely powerful, but I mean, generally like 9 wins with 40% is respectable. And of course, he does actually warrant a spot in the top meta himself here. As you can see, we are tying against ourselves with this exact moveset. And I think that the entire reason that Heracross is here is because it does beat Vigoroth. And that actually says a lot, because there's not too many things in the cup that actually can do that. So, judging from this list, you can kind of get an idea on how we're going to perform up against the rest of the cup here. The only bug that we actually win against is Fortress. In this situation, we actually lose to Scizor, Vespiquen, and then we lose to Beedrill, Venomoth, Scyther, and Masquerain. Most of the bugs do make a little bit of sense here. Scizor, I guess it just comes down to the fact that it's kind of Glass Cannon versus Glass Cannon. With Fortress, it really is going to kind of just not going to have too much damage to output towards us. If it's head to head, we do kind of have a favorable setup there. But then like Beedrill going to be resisting a lot of our damage, Venomoth going to be resisting a lot of our damage, Scyther and Masquerain going to be resisting a lot. And out of the bottom 3 there, Venomoth, Scyther, and Masquerain, they're all actually going to be able to hit us for super effective damage with their fast move, which kind of ends up throwing a wrench in Heracross's plan here. So now let's actually move on to our countering section here. This is where we're actually going to take a look at each of the typings that are allowed in this Jungle Cup to kind of figure out which typings we either need to focus on with our Heracross or kind of be wary of whenever we're going up against them. Or if you'd like to think about it, you can actually just think of taking some of these other typings to counter the Heracross is a decent way to think about it. So, we're actually going to build our Heracross here, counter close combat Mega Horn yet again. We're going to give ourselves a shield, jump over to the entire Jungle Cup this time, not a custom group. Then we're going to do 1 shield here, going to hit battle, and as you can see, it's going to fill us up. We do have a 54.5% on our shield scenario here, which is actually pretty good. We're going to scroll down to these individual matchups here. We're just going to choose normal. and it'll actually pull up all of our normal type Pokemon here. And let's get into these. So our normal typing is one of the only types that we actually do really well up against. We only have one tie here with 11 losses. So let's not try to pay too much attention to the ones that we beat, as those aren't as nearly important here. The ones that we do lose against, you can see a lot of the flyers are going to show up down here at the bottom because they do have a neutral stance up against the counter damage there. Girafarig pulling in some decent damage with its psychic type move there. Then we do have a lot of the flyers, like we said. Then we do have Porygon, Porygon 2, and Porygon Z. I'm like pretty sure they're utilizing Hidden Power here. Yeah, you can see Hidden Power flying. That makes a little bit of sense. So those numbers are a little bit jaded, but honestly, like outside of the flyers, there's not too big of a problem for us because all the flyers start to show up down here, and then once we get past the Porygon crew, which is utilizing Hidden Power, we can see Munchlax, Slickitung, Vigoroth, Persian, Dodrio, Ambipom, Blissey. I mean, you can kind of see that once we get out of the flyers territory, we start to actually do really good here. And of course, we are going to have that super duper weakness to the flying types, so that does make a lot of sense here. So I'd say outside of the flyers, the normal type is pretty solid. Next, moving into the bug types, which is one of the first types that we actually have a lot of trouble with. We only have 7 wins and 2 ties here. So our 7 wins are actually going to be Fortress, Pineco, Anorith, Armaldo, Illumise, Volbeat, Scizor, and Ariados is our first tie. Then we do have Heracross there as our other tie as well. Most of those aren't necessarily like relevant. I mean, Fortress, of course, is the most relevant there. Scizor, kind of relevant. But then after that, it's pretty much just a bunch of cleanup from the other bug type Pokemon in the cup. Once we get into our losses here, you can see we actually do lose against Pinsir, we lose against Vespiquen, Beautifly, Parasect, Kricketune, Beedrill, Ninjask. All of these Pokemon end up having their way with us, and especially some of these ones at the bottom here like Yanma, Yanmega, Scyther, and Masquerain, of course, are going to be able to utilize a lot of flying type damage, which does end up killing us this cup. Next, moving on to the electric types, we do have 9 wins here with 2 ties, which is underwhelming. Magneton, Magnemite, and Magnezone, those are pretty nice to win against, especially the Magneton and the Magnezone there. Then we do have Ampharos, Manectric. Then we do actually have the Geodude, Golem, and Graveler, which those are actually pretty nice to go up against as well. We do win against the Lantern, and then you can see we do have a tie with Luxio and Pachirisu. And then we start to lose here. So Flaffy, Jolteon, Plusle, Electabuzz, Electivire, Chinchou, Raikou, Minun, Electrode, you can see all the way down Luxray, Zapdos, and Raichu. The Alolan form are giving us our most trouble there, which those are okay. I understand most of those. Zapdos is going to be resisting some of our damage. Luxray is probably going to be utilizing Hidden Power. Yeah, it is, which take that as an inflated number. But the Raichu and the Alolan Raichu here are pretty solid, so it's surprising that regular Cantonian Raichu actually does really well here, but even though it has a really interesting matchup just using electric type moves, it still does really well here. I mean, Brick wouldn't really add anything to the matchup per se, but with Wild Charge, it's going to be able to obliterate us either way. And then the Alolan Raichu actually has some help here resisting some of our damage and actually being able to utilize Psychic. If it had the chance to do that in a real world scenario, it would actually devastate the Heracross there, so definitely quite interesting on that one. Last but not least here, we do have the grass types, which this is kind of roughly like 50%. There's not really like a clear set that we win against. There's not really like a clear set that we lose against. Basically, we just have roughly 50% win and loss ratio here. So Credilli, Nuzleaf, Shiftry, some of the easiest matchups you can see there. In the ties, we do have Lombre, and then we actually have Torterra, Leafeon. Could go either way on those depending on how the battle enters and energy and all that stuff, but in the just clean cut 1v1 shield scenarios, we would barely beat Leafeon and barely lose to Torterra. In the losses section, you can see a lot of the confusion users show up down here like Celebi, Execute, and Executor, and then Venusaur and Ivysaur, of course, are going to be here, Parasect, Victory Bell, Weeping Bell. Then it starts to just hit all of those Razor Leaf users, which, of course, Razor Leaf is still going to be super powerful in this cup in itself. So that is actually going to be it for Heracross today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. I always love to talk about my favorite Beetle, and I don't know. I'm still on the fence. I seriously do think after 3 months of him being available in a cup, why can't he have better moves? If he had better moves, I honestly think he would be a top contender. Counter is an amazing place to be with it being a fast move here, but we just have such lackluster freaking charge moves, which really makes it just ugh. So, unfortunately, I'm still not sold on Heracross being on a team. You can definitely build him. You can definitely build a team around him and do extremely well, I'm sure, but on his own, I'm not jumping at the chance to just tell you to use one. I don't think that it's that easy of a pick. I definitely think that you have to work around his weaknesses to actually make him really good, but it's definitely doable. 100% definitely doable. So that is actually going to be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. Always remember that if you do have the deep dive, you can drop it down in the comments below. We'll put it on the spreadsheet. And actually, this is what we have coming up next. So hopefully tomorrow, that will be a very interesting deep dive, as I have not seen what it is yet. But anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you can do that. But if you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.